Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 30th episode of the Hill Shadows podcast. My name is Jeremiah. I'm here with Ashley.
Hello.
We would like to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all that good stuff. It's very cold in most places here in the United States, including where we are located here in Kentucky. We've had some really cold weather. Ashley has not been out in it. I went out in it today. I think the wind chill was like negative 30. So travel is pretty crazy for everybody, so you guys stay safe. We got some really cool stories we want to share with you guys tonight. We thought we would do something kind of special since it's Christmas and the holiday season, and you know, there's all kinds of lore that goes with the holiday of Christmas. We're not really gonna get into that, but maybe a little bit as far as the elves go. There are a number of sightings that Ashley and I come across that involve small humanoid-like beings that people describe as either elves or gnomes. And since Santa Claus is getting ready to be hitting the skies tomorrow night to deliver all the presents to the good little boys and girls, you know he's gonna have helper elves with him, so it's only fitting. So, if you guys aren't already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button if you're into the paranormal. We have at least 29 other podcasts you guys can check out where we cover topics on the unknown and paranormal, and also have some footage where we just go out and check out outdoor areas and hike and stuff. So, yeah, we got a little bit of content for you guys to check out if you like that. And I think Ashley wanted to go first tonight. And I have a little story about gnomes that I'm going to share with you guys. As always, we will leave the links to any sources from anything we find in the description box below. I also want to apologize before I let her get started because we've had some issues. We've been trying to do video lately, and the video is just not working for me right now with the current setup I have. So we're just going to keep it going the way we've been doing it. It seems like why mess with something that's working, right? Do you have anything you'd like to say?
I don't think so.
You haven't been paying attention at all.
I have listened to absolutely everything you've said.
We had a rough time getting started because our daughter wanted to knock on the door when we were on the air, you know. That's pretty typical. But I guess if you don't have anything else.
You want me to go?
If you want to go, I mean.
Okay, so I'm just going to read this as it's wrote, okay?
Okay.
It's an article called Encounters with Gnomes.
Encounters with Gnomes.
Dan Borko's family moved from Wyandotte County, Kansas, to Liberty, Missouri in 1958, when he was about 9 months old. His family didn't know it, but something already lived in the house on High Street. The house, a bungalow built atop a hill in the 1920s, wasn't the only structure on that site. There was a spring in the basement. Borko said, the site of the spring was the site of a large farm from the 1860s through 1914. Our property was the part of a farmyard at some point. A barn still sat outside the two-bedroom house when the Borkos moved there. In that house in 1952, Borko saw something that has haunted him in his mind since. I'll call him a troll because that's what he reminded me of, Borko said. Regardless of the name, troll, gnome, dwarf, goblin, these human-like earth creatures have littered cultural mythology across the globe, and they are known to approach and sometimes abduct children. Borko, 4, napped in the same room as his 2 younger brothers, both in cribs, when something roused him from sleep. As his eyes slid open, he realized he and his baby brothers weren't alone. I had just awakened from a nap and was rubbing my eyes and saw what you would call a troll, Borko said. It was an old man with a long beard, large nose, about 3 feet tall, standing at the foot of my bed, and I was astounded. The little old man wore German lederhosen and held a smoking pipe in his hand. As the little old man stood looking at Borko, he smiled through his beard, winked, and disappeared through the closet door. The only thing I could mutter was, "Goss," Borko said. My mother came in and opened the closet door, and on top of the shelf was a toy rubber goose. Bordko knows he didn't say goose. The word goss had something to do with his troll. Although Bordko doesn't think he saw the little man again, later in life his mother told him he often talked about someone no one else could see. As a child, my mother said I had an imaginary friend, and I called it by its name, he said. My mother said it sounded like a science fiction movie name. During this time, Bordko remembers looking out his bedroom window at night and seeing people near the old barn in the backyard. Little people. That's what scared me, he said. There were fairy tale pictures on my wall. There was a man on the mountain smoking a pipe, and this reminded me of him. As a child, Bordko, now an artist with a master's degree in photography from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, once tried to capture his little man on paper. I remember doing a drawing of a picture of a man's face with large dark eyes, he said, and my brother Bill started crying. Every time he saw it, he was out of his wits. Maybe Bordko wasn't the only person in his family who saw the troll. He certainly wasn't the only person of that era who saw it. David Schwab, 52, grew up in Orange County, New Jersey, and is familiar with tales of a similar entity. His friend Jerry saw one of these trolls in early 1960s. I remember Jerry always talking about some kind of troll, elf, leprechaun type critter with a rather long beard being on his steps, Schwab said. Schwab met with Jerry in December 2009, before his friend moved to the Philippines and asked him about the story. He said that when he was a kid, he was in his backyard, and he was startled by a small gnome-like man with a long beard standing by his back porch, Schwab said. He said he had funny clothes on and a pointed hat and all. The entity, about 2 or 3 feet tall, just stood at the steps, staring at him. This wasn't the last time the gnome made an appearance at Jerry's house. When Jerry was in his 20s, his 5-year-old nephew took a nap in a converted bedroom in his family called the shower room because it had once been a bathroom and shower had still jutted from the wall. His nephew started crying and ran downstairs, Schwab said. He said that he was woken by a small man with a long white beard that stood and looked at him. Now that's weird. That's all it says.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of the reports, it seems as unlikely as it would seem that they would have pointy hats.
But every story that I've ever heard, they in fact do.
You know what that makes me think with a lot of these cryptids that we talk about?
What?
That humans are the most unoriginal pieces of shit ever. Right? I mean, because if you look at science fiction and like movies and stuff, you got werewolves, dogmen, little garden gnomes, real gnomes that dress the same way.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some real life vampires. I mean, I don't think anybody comes up with anything truly original. I think
it's all from something that has actually been seen.
It's rooted in truth, like every single thing, right?
I would agree to that to an extent.
But yeah, if you guys have any encounters, or if you've had any encounters with any elves, or anything for that matter, and would like to share it, you can email us at hillshadowsky@yahoo.com, and we'll share your story too.
Yeah, or if you know what it means to dream about gnomes, of them like being in your house.
I don't have any kind
cool.
of history with gnomes. I've never had any encounter with anything like that. But Ashley here has had an interesting dream recently that I would like her to speak on. Why don't you go ahead and talk about that dream?
Why does weird things happen to me? So like every time you're talking about it, you're like,
I
don't,
but
Ashley said this.
I've always been like, I've never had anything happen to me. I want to experience, and it always happens to her. It's never me.
I don't know. It was a weird dream, and I remember almost all the details of it for the most part. It was like we were living in an apartment complex, which we don't. But in my dream, it was like these little rows of apartments. Well, actually, it was more like a square. There was like 2 buildings in front of each other, long buildings, and then one, like connected, like a U shape. And I remember like getting ready to go outside or something, and there being like one of the walls was almost like was built around a rock somehow. Like there was a rock, like the wall was made of rock. And it was almost like that rock kind of turned into like a window or a door, and a little man and woman gnome, like couple feet tall, but they're wearing like, she's wearing a dress, and it's light blue in color, and she's wearing a pointy hat, but not a hat like a tall hat. You know what I mean? Like you usually
Like
see
a
gnomes wearing.
witch hat.
Yeah, no, not even that. Like a small little, look like a little tiny triangle on her head, like a little short pointed triangle hat. They both had that on, and both of them were in like light blue clothing, and they were hungry. They wanted food, and it was mainly the female interacting with me, and she kind of looked old. Like they were both like kind of wrinkly, like little old people. And
Crazy.
I know that they were hungry, and I'm giving some meat to the female. It was like a chunk of meat of some sort, I don't know. And the male being like, not that he was being mean in any way.
Just being skittish, right?
He was being skittish, but there was also a feeling of like, if I do anything wrong, this little thing is going to hurt me.
He's gonna
like it's
whack
going
you
to
and take off, right?
Possibly, like it was going to
He's not
really
to
do
be
some
trusted,
damage.
is he?
No, he was not to be trusted
And
at all.
also, I wanted to speak on, we have a video where we camp at a remote cabin in the woods. It's my dad's cabin, and in those woods, he hasn't taken me there yet. But if I ever get to go see it, I will definitely record it and share with you guys. But he says there are little stone houses that are made that would
like a little house,
like the size of a little person.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen these, but I'd like to see them.
But you can't get to them in the summer.
Could a normal sized person have built them? Absolutely. But in my mind, I'd like to envision that these were.
Well,
it could have been.
Tell them about the other story about the woman.
Right. My dad has a friend. I'm not probably not hitting all the facts on this, so I'm going to just sum it up. But basically, she was walking somewhere in the woods and heard a commotion going on, like some singing and dancing, like
heard
partying.
Dancing?
Huh?
She heard dancing?
Heard singing, I suppose.
Okay.
Like cheering,
music.
Yeah, like joyous laugh, whatever.
Okay.
A good time on the horizon, you know. But she's trying to see what's going on. And it's over on the other side of these bushes or hedges or whatever. She like peeks over the hedges. There's like little people dancing around. I don't know what happens after that. I don't know if she like, dips out without being seen.
Right.
I don't know. But it's a interesting little tale. I've always thought that was a pretty cool little story. But yeah, it took place here in Kentucky.
I've never put too much thought into gnomes being real, right? But
I always thought
maybe.
my personal beliefs on that, I've told you before, is it's probably more likely than Bigfoot or something because
you think so?
Because of their size, they could maybe
easier?
They could be to blame for the noises.
What if they are just elemental? They're not fully.
Well, then we're getting into the Fae and everything, and that's possible. Anyway, I guess I will get into this story because it's kind of long.
Okay.
And I haven't read this. I just know what topic it's about.
All right.
I will post the link in the description. This one is by a user on Reddit called Weird Bryce Guy, and this was from 135 days ago. It's titled "Gnomes Are Real, and They're Scary Little Assholes." Says gnomes are real, but they're not nice and cute little garden dwellers. They don't wear colorful clothing or fend off invasive pests or plant things beneficial to your lawn. No, gnomes are awful, devilish little terrors with a penchant for cruelty. I'd know I had to get rid of a gnome infestation, and it nearly cost me my life.
Infestation.
I can't wait to hear this.
All right, let's hear it.
I decided to do some late summer yard work for my neighborhood to make a little cash for when I return to school. There are a few elderly couples throughout the subdivision, and even the proudest of them have always accepted my help when offered. During winter, I'd shovel driveways. In fall, I'd rake leaves, and in summer, I'd help out in the gardens. Mow lawns, repair fencing. It always felt nice to help my community, and usually paid fairly well. One of the couples, a family whose real name I'll replace with Connors, have always firmly declined my offers, and I've generally suspected the reasoning being that they like their privacy. I'd never seen them attend any of the neighborhood gatherings, and they generally kept to themselves, within town as well. It never bothered me. I'd always been a little relieved upon being turned down, considering the enormity of their yard. Their property spans several acres, and with only a standard push mower to use, I'd be out in the shadeless heat all day. But this summer, upon passing through the front gate of their property to make my obligatory morning offer, Mrs. Connor came out of the house to greet me, as if she'd been expecting me. I waved, and she gestured for me to come onto the porch. She had two glasses in her hand and handed me one as she took a seat in one of the chairs. I thanked her and seated myself beside her, and before I could even take a sip of the apparently freshly squeezed lemonade, she went right into her request. She explained how she and her husband had been dealing with an infestation of sorts, one that had cost them not only her garden, but their sleep and general peace of mind as well. Initially, I only half listened, since upon hearing the word infestation, I immediately planned on saying no. I'm not an exterminator, and while I'm not terrified of bugs, I generally don't like dealing with them in large quantities. But when she mentioned how she wanted to keep the problem a secret and was willing to pay quite a sum to that effect, I honed in and paid her words a little more attention. She said that they didn't have any deterrent specific to their particular kind of infestation, but that I was free to use whatever means necessary to get rid of the nasty vermin. I thought it odd that they wouldn't have anything in the way of pesticides, considering the scales of their land and how they had at one point farmed it, and considering their past aversion to my presence in a garden they presumably cherished quite a bit. But I kept quiet, my interest and willingness to help already secured by the mention of a large payment. I've mentioned that they used to farm, but eventually made enough money to simply get the land to go uncultivated as they settled into their golden years. She ended our conversation by saying that I could get started immediately, and then motioned for me to return my glass, from which I hadn't taken a single sip. I quickly took a few swigs and then handed it back to her, and only soured my face after she had gone. The lemonade was entirely unsweetened, and yet she drained her own glass as if perfectly accustomed to such bitterness. At her word, a shout from within the house, which I was not invited into, I went around back toward the massive shed just before the lawn. In there I found Mr. Connors, bent over a work table, his back to me. There were unlabeled cans piled along the table, many of them open, fumes emanating visibly from several. The collective smell was very pungent, more than a little offensive to my nostrils. Without venturing too far in, I introduced myself and related Mrs. Connor's instructions. Mr. Connor, with his back still to me, raised a hand as if to say, "All right," and then promptly went back to his business. Figuring that I'd be left to my own devices, I turned to leave, but a sort of grunt from the old man stopped me. And a few moments later, he turned around, bearing a glass container in his hand, one that resembled some kind of alchemist's decanter. "Take this in here, and when you find the little bastards, douse 'em. No need to ignite it. The stuff'll burn fine on its own. It'll burn clean, too. The yard won't be tarnished." He then shoved the container in my hand and strode past me out the shed. I scanned the work table's surface, but nothing there was identifiable, as if old man Connors had purposely stripped every single label from the various cans, flasks, and bottles. Assuming that the concoction I held was volatile in one way or another, I set it down carefully and retrieved my gloves from my back pocket. I didn't have goggles, and my lack of seasonal allergies made the use of a mask wholly unnecessary for most jobs. So my 4-year-old gloves from a warehouse job I'd had were the only things available to me in the way of PPE. Heading back outside, I figured that I'd find the hive or nest or hovel or whatever, dump the dubious concoction therein, and then wait a little while to see if anything swarmed out. Lawnmower at the ready. They hadn't asked me to cut the lawn, but I figured that without proper extermination tools, the rapidly spinning blades of a lawnmower would be as efficient as anything else for cutting down stragglers. Retrieving my lawnmower from the truck, I went into the yard and canvassed the foremost portion until I found an area of disturbed land about 50 feet from the house. The grass around this area was flattened as if it had been consistently trampled, and in some places it was even blackened as if burned or rotted. At the center of this disturbance was a hole about the size of a dinner plate and immeasurably deep. Peering within, I saw only blackness and heard nothing but a faint, uncanny tittering. Figuring that this was at least one emergence point of the yet-to-be-named vermin, I quickly poured a little of the mystery liquid into the hole and stood back. I expected maybe a little frothing in the ground, perhaps a small surge or billow of fumes. I didn't expect steam to spew out of the hole, nor did I expect to hear high-pitched shrieking as if I had poured acid into a bag of cats. A column of greenish vapor rose from the hole, and the shrill, multifaceted screams echoed out into the open sky. More than a little unnerved, I'd never heard any bug or rodent make such an awful sound. I backed several feet away, momentarily forgetting that I'd bought the lawnmower. A few seconds later, a tiny figure weakly emerged from the hole, fumes rising from its back like a fluttering cape of smoke. Through the vaporous haze around it, I saw a diminutive, vaguely humanoid figure, albeit apparently lacking a head. The body teetered on the open ground as if drunk or disoriented, and then fell over, still smoking. The screams within the hole grew weaker and then eventually faded away even as the smoke and fumes dissipated. Stunned, I cautiously approached the hole and peered in. A smell still lingered, one of burnt earth and decay, and something else, something noxious and indescribable, old beyond measure. But there weren't any other figures that I could see, so I turned my attention to the one that had managed to escape the hole. As I mentioned, its body was that of a small person, about the size of a child's doll, though it wore no clothing whatsoever. The skin was a brownish orange, like a rotting carrot, and it appeared thick and rough, though I wasn't sure if these attributes were its natural color and textures, or the result of the acidic substance I doused it with. Its aforementioned lack of a head wasn't completely true. There was a head, only it was situated within its chest, jutting a little outward from between its pecs. The head, or rather the embossed face, had two small, whiteless eyes, both of which were open, staring fixedly and lifelessly skyward,
Oh my gosh.
reflecting none of the morning sun's light. The rest of its face was almost unmentionably ugly, its features warped and exaggerated in some aspects, and shrunken or misshapen in others. It elicited an immediate feeling of repulsion in me, which managed to stifle somewhat the pity I'd felt earlier upon hearing his tortured screams. Still clearly this was a being of some intelligence and some relation, however distant, to humanity, and I felt that I needed an immediate explanation from the homeowners. Leaving the little creature's body there, I trudged back to the home and knocked on the back door, still bearing the toxic substance. Mr. Connor answered and grimaced at seeing the liquid, as if disappointed that I hadn't used all of it. I told him exactly what had happened, but he listened as if already closely familiar with the strangely human pests. His relaxed response to incredibly annoyed me, so I demanded answers. He replied by saying that they were prepared to pay me a small fortune to flush out the whole lot of them. By way of convincing, he withdrew it into the home and returned a moment later with a lockbox, which he opened to reveal a neat stack of cash, dozens of hundreds banded together. Any ethical issues I'd had were summarily forgotten upon seeing the money. The old man smiled and turned to step back inside, but as I was about to head back into the yard, he called out saying, "Be wary of 'em. They may look a little like us, but they ain't, and theirs is a fell and ancient kind. Their foul magic has taken root in this here land, and there be horrors buried below." With that, he shut the door. Sufficiently warned.
Why does that sound like why do you say it like that? Why do you use those words?
I don't know. Sufficiently warned, I trekked back out into the yard toward the spot where I'd encountered the first emergence hole. Yeah, so I just got that on my phone as well. The little creature that had crawled out was now little more than a loose pile of remains. It had decomposed in the short span of time I'd been gone. There were no bones among this pile, only its darkened and crumbled flesh, which looked weirdly like the soil beneath it. Disgusted, and admittedly a bit frightened by the inhumanity of it, I left the hole and ventured farther out into the yard to find another. A short way away, perhaps half an acre from the lawn's initial edge, I found a small pile of gray stones, like a cairn, only there were strange roots intertwined throughout the structure, as if something had been planted immediately beneath it or within the pile of stones. And while I'm no geologist, I felt that the stones weren't native to the land. They were oddly smooth, as if rendered that way by eons of rushing water, almost gem-like in their surfaces. The weed-like roots around them were pitch black, darker than anything else in the yard. Something about the structure was incredibly ominous and made me feel as if I'd counter some small piece of a much larger and darker image. Shaken but still determined to complete the job, I gave the thing a wide berth and continued on, but stopped a few paces away, seeing something off in the distance. Standing atop another one of the root enmeshed cairns was one of the diminutive creatures, only this one was very much alive, and its black, beady, chest-embedded eyes were glaring at me with open and profound hatred.
Chest embedded?
Rendered speechless by the sight of it and the sheer malignance of its gaze, I stood there, unsure of what to do. For a few more moments, it quietly projected its seemingly baseless and I can't read that, then hopped down from the cairn, landing somewhere behind it. I waited, giving my pounding heart time to return to a somewhat normal pace, and then proceeded on, container of acid held out before me. Reaching the cairn, I cautiously peered behind it and found another hole, though this one considerably smaller than the last, just big enough for the burrowing of a single creature. The apparent depth, however, was comparable to the last one. There was only darkness therein, though the hole lacked the far-down tittering sounds I'd heard on the former. Unsealing the lid of the container, I went to tilt the mouth toward the hole, but a voice high-pitched and harshly intoned spoke from its depths. I don't even know how to say this. Ihak na moon, ihak na or moon say dak. The vehemence behind the voice made me freeze, and the subsequent silence, deathly intense, made me reapply the cap and step away from the hole. I hadn't expected the things to be capable of communication, let alone real sentences, and hearing its vicious speech unsettled me more than anything I ever had. I decided to abandon this particular hole to find another one, and hoped that I could, through some subterranean connection, eliminate that particularly menacing entity by flooding the hole of another. Thoroughly frightened but still financially desperate enough not to flee, I continued my search. No amount of money would have been enough to convince me to help the Connerys had I known the full scope of nightmares housed within the depths of their land. Now, this goes on to part 2, but I'm not even trying to carry on with that because I'm pretty sure it's quite long.
Oh, I mean, I feel quite invested. I need to know what happened.
Are you that invested in it?
I need to know, yeah. I'm not sure I'm supposed to follow this story.
Let's see.
And is this real?
It's supposed to be, man. It's just, somebody posted this. It's supposed to be a real account of them doing some yard work, right? I'll carry on, man. Here I go. The third hole sat even farther back in the yard and was also guarded. I don't know if the sentinels had always been there or if they'd been... Hold it, man. This is a different one, man. It's a different story. I don't know if I can get to the second part.
Maybe search and maybe next week we can finish it off.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Because I need to know. I have to come to a conclusion about this.
I think maybe that is, but let's see. So third hole, we talked about 2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the sentinels had always been there or if they've been summoned. This is it.
Yeah, keep going.
But there they stood, one each, atop a strange root-entwined cairn, their black eyes staring daggers at me as I approached. I hadn't expected to actually fight any of the little things. I figured that, like the last one, any more I encountered would simply flee into their holes upon sighting me. But these two apparently had other plans. Their swarthy, diminutive bodies stood ready for combat. They weren't armed, but it was plain that they planned to confront me. I remembered the screams I'd heard when pouring the acid into the hole, and the weird, linguistically incomparable words of the creature who had fled. Both had sounded eerily human, albeit pitched appropriately to their doll-like statures. Shrill voices that had sounded wild, yet somehow intoned with the semblance or derivation of humanity. I stopped my approach about 10 feet from the cairns and waited to see if the two creatures would attempt some form of communication. I figured that if I had to, I could uncork the acid and splash a little in their direction. If it didn't kill, it'd at least scare them away, ideally back into their holes, at which point I could pour the rest of the stuff inside. But neither of the little demon-eyed things moved. Their chest-embedded faces merely stared, grimacing evilly, unblinking, knowing that I'd have to deal with them all if I wanted to collect my payment. I decided to take the initiative and engage the little pest first. As smoothly as I could, I removed the lid, my eyes never leaving my small-framed foes. When the lid was off, I took a breath, and then as fast as I could manage, arced the container quickly in front of me, sending a stream of the strange homemade acid toward the two Karen-perished creatures. One, perhaps not expecting me to actually fight in open ground, flinched upon seeing the liquid, and a moment later it was writhing on the ground, having fallen from its veritable guard tower upon being splashed with the acid. The other, faster than his companion, had leapt backwards just before being touched and quickly rounded the cairn, crawling on all fours toward me. I was too appalled by the sight of the dying gnome to immediately react to the assault of its comrade. Before I could turn and sling out another splash, the gnome was upon me. Its little hands, three-fingered, I noticed for the first time, sank into my hand and squeezed with a strength I wouldn't have thought it capable. When I involuntarily fell to my knees, the gnome used its disproportionate strength to swat away the container of acid, sending it sliding across the grass. Then, with practiced swiftness, it delivered a crushing blow to my temple, and the last thing I saw was the acid steadily pouring out of the container onto the grass, and the subsequent plume of smoke as the caustic substance ate through the earth. As darkness enveloped me, a shrill tittering filled my ears, the high-pitched cackle of some fledgling imp newly loosed from hell to carry out its diabolic deeds. It's hard for me to relate the events that followed, but I will so that others may be warned. I awoke in a place that I can only incompletely describe as dank, murky, incomprehensibly spacious, yet paradoxically suffocating. There was a sourceless yet omnipresent wetness, as if the very walls were salivating, inexhaustibly some kind of transparent slime. I was laying on my back on a bed of soft black soil, though the environment around me was plainly rock, hardened sediment, and what appeared to be long streaks of floor-buried bone, or some whitish deposit. As I mentioned, the space was huge, cavernous. I was granted a sense of its enormity by the intentional placement of glowing shell-like projections throughout, some affixed to the walls nearest to me, others twinkling off the far-flung distance like stars. It was psychologically oppressive, simply waking up and beholding the sheer grandeur of this subterranean domain. The impossibility of it hurt my head, made me feel woozy and nauseous when I looked upon for more than a few moments at a time. I sat up, hoping I wouldn't lose consciousness from the sudden exertion. When my head settled a little and I could look around without much disorientation, I tried to spot some kind of natural tunnel or gnome-built passageway, any point of egress that could take me back to the mentally palatable surface, or at least someplace less spatially irreconcilable. Finally, when my eyes had adjusted to the hazy, ever-shifting, sporadically lit murk, I spotted a small opening in a wall to my left, down a short declivity from my position. The space was about knee-high but rounded, clearly having been carved by a tool of some kind, rather than the result of natural erosion in the rock wall. With a last fearful glance at my inverted, star-scattered abyss above, I got on my hands and knees, and hoping against hope, crawled into the circular aperture. After what could have been seconds or minutes of dust-choked, claustrophobia-inducing crawling, my mind was still reeling from the unreality of my plunge. I emerged into a space that was even more mystifying and sense-defying than the area for which I had come. I stood and dusted myself off, not for care of my clothing or cleanliness. My clothes had long since been soiled and tattered beyond repair, but simply to give the more refined parts of my mind something to focus on. Words such as cavernous, vast, and sprawling are pitifully inadequate in describing this ultra-spatial region. I had somehow gone from a huge yet at least abstractly fathomable cave to an inner world, a realm within the bowels of the great earth. This is getting pretty crazy, man.
Yeah.
And it's very long, too, man. Like, this would probably go on for... I should probably do a part 2 to this or something, because it's just... It's probably going to go on for like another 30 minutes if I read the rest of this.
Okay, well, maybe
and
stop
you have
at a good
another
spot.
one, right?
I do.
So we'll
Well,
just
this is crazy.
finish this
It
off,
seems
man.
so like a story, like a
It's
made-up
very
story.
specific.
Very, very, very specific.
It's very specific. But it is Christmas time, and it's about gnomes or something of that nature. So, you know, who knows if it's real or not, man. You never
It's
know,
a
man.
good story.
It is a good story.
Wow.
But I do want to know how it ends, right?
Yeah, I want to know. Like, I've already invested a lot into this story, I feel like. Let me pull up this other little thing for mine real quick. What do you all think about that story?
It's pretty. I like as far as like the head being sat down in the chest, it's awfully specific if it's made up, you know?
What head set down in the chest? What does that mean? Does that mean like
That's
it's
what I'm
down?
saying,
You know what I mean?
I
Like,
guess.
is there a neck, but it's like low? Is the head within the chest?
I'm trying to see if I may be able to sum up the end of this or something, but
But I like the detail in it. I gotta find this other little story real quick.
it really is so long, guys. I don't want to keep going too long, so I'll finish it up next week or something.
Is this it right here? Yeah, here it is. Okay, so you're gonna read it next week.
Yeah, because I don't really.
Don't forget to look.
It's
Make sure you mark it.
yeah. Well, I only read a little of the second part, so. But yeah, I'll finish this story for you guys next week, and I think Ashley has another one she wants to share tonight, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not gonna start at the very beginning. Let's see. Should I start? Well, no, because it's not necessary. Alright. I'm not going to start at the very beginning of it because it's like a paragraph of it's just talking about like what gnomes are. Alright. Or different entities. And it says, one of these is that of the little people, appearing to be friendly and almost playful, as if they want to somehow make contact and play with us for reasons unknown. One such encounter is given... Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry, hold on a minute. So the first time they saw these gnomes was as they were taking a walk along the dirt road and running around playing. As they did so, something strange would happen indeed, the witness says. We began laughing and chasing one another as moms do. Well, I don't know about chasing each other as a mom, but whatever. About 2 miles down the road, my oldest son, Austin, let out a scream that made me immediately turn to see what was wrong. That's when I saw them. My son was pointing down the road a bit, and there, on the side of the road, was 4 little people. Now, when I say little people, I do not mean short. I mean about a foot tall, and they were all wearing pointy little white hats and white clothes. 2 of them were splashing arm in arm in the rain puddles that had collected on the side of the road. Sorry. And one of them appeared to be filling up a bucket with some water. The last one was the smallest and walked with a bit of a limp, and I noticed a 5th one that was much taller than all the rest and wore all black and had a much shorter black hat on as well. I could tell right away that the one in black was obviously some type of authority or leader, and I watched as he picked the smallest one up and placed him on his shoulders. Now all this time we were standing there watching them. They seemed completely unaware of us. We just stood there, frozen, and not believing what we were seeing. Then, out of nowhere, the leader, or one in black, seemed to notice us, and he turned to the others, obviously telling them it was time to go, because they stopped what they were doing right away and followed the biggest one into the tall grass. We walked up to the place where they had been after waiting a while to be sure they were not coming back, and there were a bunch of tiny bare footprints left behind in the mud, along with weird writing that looked a lot like hieroglyphs. We looked around the area, and I gotta tell you, there was no place around there that they could have gone without us seeing them, or them having to cross the road to the other side where the woods are. Although on this occasion, these gnomes seemed to be a bit shy about being seen, this would apparently change, as they would soon appear again and seem to want to communicate or play with the witness. The witness says that later, that very same evening, she went outside to have a smoke, and out of the surrounding gloom, these little people materialized again, looking upon her with what she took to be a great curiosity. The witness describes this odd encounter. I went out for a smoke, and I couldn't believe it. There they were again, just at the edge of my property, staring at me with such curiosity that for some reason made me not feel afraid of them. They began to copy or mimic my movements, and when I put my hands on my hips, they did so too. I finally sat down on my mother's old wheelchair and noticed how curious they seemed to be about the chair. I went inside after a while, and in the morning, when I went back out there were lots of tiny muddy footprints all over the concrete patio leading up to the old wheelchair and all over the chair itself. I had to laugh. It just seemed so surreal to have really seen them, and now this. Since I have seen the tiny people numerous times, and each time they seem to be observing me, I've never gotten any bad feelings or ill intentions from them, so I'm not scared of them anymore. But I gotta say, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard of. Very weird indeed. Who or what were these diminutive people? What did they want from this witness? Were they just playing, trying to somehow communicate in their own way, or what? In another account from the book Mysterious Disappearances and Other Strange Tales by Ron Quinn, there is an account of a couple called Rick and Joyce who apparently owned a remote mountain cabin getaway where they would spend their weekends. One day they were out tending their garden when a small stone landed at their feet, seeming to come out of nowhere. Puzzled, they looked around and at first suspected that perhaps a squirrel had dropped the stone from a tree, but there was nothing there. As they looked, another stone fell, lightly lobbed from the branches and obviously not meant to harm. Another stone followed, bouncing against the porch and tumbling down the steps. The baffled couple looked up into the trees once again, staring through the branches, and this time they claimed that they saw a face of a little man peering out from the leaves at them, wearing a bright, pointy hat and sporting a full beard. The little man was only about a foot in height and seemed to smile at them before jumping down from the tree onto the roof of the cabin and disappearing into the brush. The couple tried to coax the strange little man back out, but he was gone, and they would not make another sighting. Again, we are faced with the question of what this entity, creature, whatever you want to call it, wanted. What was the meaning of those tossed rocks? Why did it smile at them? Was it trying to play with them? Was this a gesture of aggression? We'll never know. There's another report along these lines came to me from a reader who says this happened shortly after moving to a rural town in California. One evening, she says she woke to a light tapping on her window, which was odd, as it was the middle of the night and they had no children or neighbors. And making it even more bizarre was that she was on the second floor of the home. She went to the window, but no one was there. And there was really nowhere anyone could have gone to hide so quickly. She left the curtains open and settled back into bed, with that tapping still on her mind, when it started again. This time, she did see someone, or at least something, and she tells me. There in the window was the face of a tiny little man, just peering in at me. He had a little beard, pure white, and had a green pointed little hat sitting askew on his head. I would guess that he would have only been around 2 feet in height, which was baffling to me as I was on the second floor of the house. I just sat there, totally astonished. The little man tapped on the window again and smiled, and I didn't get an evil or sinister feeling from him. He seemed almost like he wanted to play. Then he waved and seemed to step away from the window, although I don't know how because there was nothing but a sheer drop on the ground. I was so curious that I went to look outside again, and this time he was gone and he did not come back.
Interesting.
This is another story. When it was about a boy. I'm not reading the in-between pieces now. I'm just going to... So I guess a brother and sister had an encounter. So when he was about 9 years old, he woke up in the middle of the night. He and his sister were sharing a bedroom then. When he woke up, he saw some odd-looking dwarf thing that was sitting on the inside of his sister's bed while she was asleep. He couldn't see its face well, since it was turned at a way that he could only see its back and a bit of its side. According to him, it was doing something with its hands, like it was carving a stick or something like that. It wore a checkered yellow shirt and had a backpack on its back. Its hair was scruffy and dark. When my friend saw it, he got scared and tried to wake his sister up, but she was still sleeping and the dwarf continued doing whatever it was doing. Then he yelled for his mom, and as she was coming, turning on the light in the other room, the dwarf stood up and walked towards the door, which was closed, and it just disappeared, like it turned to mist and went through the door before his mother came in the room. That's weird.
Yeah, that's pretty
There's
crazy.
there's more. Do you want me to keep going or do you want to stop now?
No, go ahead. If you got something
Maybe
else,
another
keep it rolling. Yeah.
Okay.
I got time
let's
for
see.
one more for sure. I mean,
This
we're on the
one-
topic of gnomes, so.
Yeah. Okay.
It's Christmas time.
This is something about someone's grandmother's experience with a very active and seemingly playful gnome, of which she says. She said she was just sitting in her house one day. For those of you not familiar with a Mexican house, usually the house has a type of court or patio right in the middle where it's open, so there's a sun and the sky coming in. And she had her eyes closed, just relaxing, when she felt a tug on her pants, on one of her legs. She ignored it and kept her eyes closed. Again, she felt a tug on her pants, and she thought it was like a cat or something. And when she opened her eyes, her shoe on one of her feet were gone. Later that day, she found the shoe down where the animals were, by this big door she has leading to a big yard in the town river. Well, this happened again the next day, and she said she was determined to catch that cat. Only this time, after the second tug, she opened her eyes and said, "I got you." And to her surprise, it was a tiny little man, almost like a fairy, only without any wings or anything. He was running with her shoe, but then he dropped it. She would also tell me that sometimes when they would eat or have dinner, they would sometimes leave tortillas on the table in a cloth, and later they wouldn't be there anymore. One time, one of my aunts saw one and ran out of the house across the street to the neighbor's house. Said while these encounters seem harmless enough, other reports seem to have a more sinister or threatening feel to them. In many gnome encounters, the creatures are described as being rather malevolent and instilling a potent fear in those who see them. Okay,
Plus,
so
in
this is an
Alaska,
account.
they're known for like stealing kids and stuff.
Yeah.
There's
All right,
actually
so this one's probably, I guess,
there's a missing 411 case where a woman seen like a small person running away
with
from
her daughter.
house. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so something darted behind a tree trunk. I kept watching, thinking maybe it was a wallaby or something. Boy, was I wrong. I looked back at my daughter and then absent-mindedly looked around again at the tree trunk. And there was a gnome. That's the only way I can describe it. It was a type of tiny person, maybe 30 centimeters tall. What is the most unbelievable is that it really was like a garden gnome. Red hat and rosy cheeks. I remember it had darkly colored lips. It was like looking at me with what I can only describe as a malevolent look. It looked evil. I saw it for about 5-10 seconds before something caused me to quickly look back at my daughter. And when I looked back, the gnome was gone, and I immediately took my daughter home. I suffered terrible anxiety and nightmares after. I had this fear that the gnome hitched a ride with us home, and that it was constantly watching me from around corners and moving items around the house. Definitely one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life. I don't know if my mind created the image of the gnome or what, but what I felt was not friendly.
It's weird how your mind will try to tell you that you just made stuff up.
Yep.
I always thought it was pretty interesting. Like, even when I seen the black triangle thing, like,
I know.
I bet I stared at it for 30 seconds trying to convince myself it was something else. Just very strange.
With that one, I knew that couldn't be anything normal. Like, that's not, that was weird. That was truly one of the weirdest things. Like, seeing something that you know is not supposed to exist.
Yeah, it was very strange.
Was a weird feeling.
Well,
I'd give
hopefully
anything
you
if I
guys-
had grabbed my phone and taken a picture of that freaking close. I mean, it was so close. I feel like I could throw a rock at it.
hopefully everybody has liked
Stories?
the stories about gnomes and elves for
I didn't know
Christmas
there were so
time.
many.
You know, I was quite shocked to find as many as I was able to find in the short amount of time that I researched it.
These are my links. Just read it.
So there might be more of these things out here than we're aware of. I mean, I tend to think they probably come from wherever these other things come from, like where does Sasquatch go? I think there's some type of pocket dimension or something they're able to access. But whatever they know how to do, it's the thing we're missing on figuring all this stuff out. And maybe we'll never figure it out. Who knows?
Yeah.
There's actually some really good video of supposed creatures like that out there too. I've seen a couple. I'm not saying I can find them and share them with you guys, but
there's also
if you guys dig deep enough, there's some out there. You can tell the good from the bad too if you
No, there's a lot of people that believe that one dude. I'm not gonna say the name because I don't. You know what I mean? But
it looks super realistic,
it looks so real,
but
it's not.
I don't think he intends for it to be real either. I'm pretty sure the guy that works with him is a graphic, some type of graphics guy, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, hopefully you guys are having a great Christmas weekend. You guys are somewhere nice and warm and safe, because if it's cold like it is where you're at, where I'm at, there's no sense in going outside or trying to travel anywhere. It could get really dangerous really quick.
They say like wind chill -40 out there?
That's right, yeah. So we've lucked out so far, and the electric has stayed on, and we're going to keep praying that it continues to stay on. And tomorrow the temperature is going to be a little warmer than it was today, and Monday will be even closer to the freezing mark, and hopefully we'll keep the electric pumping while we're dealing with this cold weather the remainder of the time anyway. But yeah, you guys get a hold of us, send in your encounters, share the videos. We appreciate you guys. And I don't think I have anything else for tonight. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, so we got a big weekend ahead. Gonna eat some good food with family and relax, take it easy, and get back to the grind of things next week. Not even really then, man. We got kids on Christmas break for another week, so yeah,
like it.
It's great. We're having a good Christmas over here. Hopefully you guys are doing the same. And we'll see you